Something was afoot amongst the low kingdoms of England, and the people knew it. For weeks, the low kings of England had been arriving in Novum Castrum to meet with King Ector and his strange visitor from Avalon. King Leo de Grace came there, King Everlake came there, King Ban came, as did King Blowbrus. They met in secret and in silence. Even the guards were forbidden to stand by the doors when they met. And there were rumours too that large armies were forming and heading their way north to the city. Perhaps, the people thought to themselves, perhaps the Low Kings of England had finally decided to take action against the Low Kings of Scotland and were planning an invasion north, beyond the wall of Hadrian, to retake the mines of Morpeth and all that the city needed in order to claim back its wealth. At least, this was the main rumour that spread amongst the taverns and the slums and the dockyards. But it was not the only rumour, ladies and gents. There was another rumour still, and that was that perhaps the High King of Britain's heir had at long last been found. Arthur had not been made squire to Sir Kay as he had first thought that he would. No. Instead, Arthur had been made the personal guard and servant of an emissary from Avalon. This was nothing to Arthur. Hardly the stuff of dreams that he'd thought of. He had truly believed that King Ector would make him squire to Sir Kay, that he could serve as squire to Sir Kay and eventually become knight, and now he was what? Just a footman, following around some emissary from Avalon who wasn't even a real knight or lord or nothing. And what did his duties consist of? Standing by this emissary in important meetings, standing guard, protecting him? No. The emissary told Arthur to stand in his chambers and guard them. There was nothing in the chambers that Arthur was sent to guard. Nothing, at least, that the emissary had brought, or that Arthur could see, at least. He'd even checked the chests of drawers in there. There was nothing, not even a lock upon them. Arthur was stood guard over nothing. He'd been given to this emissary to protect him, but this emissary clearly didn't want him. And after a week of Arthur lying to Alice and the people from the kitchens and saying, oh, he would become squire to Sir Kay just as soon as this emissary left, Arthur confronted the man. Merlin had spent all day meeting with, for the most part, all of the Low Kings of England. As he returned to his room, Arthur stood and faced him and said, "My lord." For Arthur could hardly contain the scorn that was in his voice. "If it is that you do not want me to act as your personal guard, I ask that you release me from your service. I am doing nothing for you, standing guard over this room." "Well," said Merlin, sitting down in the room, "I think you're providing a very useful service here." "I am not," said Arthur. "I'm not. You must understand, I was set to become squire to Sir Kay. Squire to Sir Kay, and then I could have been a knight. Your presence here and you keeping me in this room is stopping me from doing that. If there is war coming against Scotland, as everyone is saying, I should be out there upon the battlefield serving as Sir Kay's squire, not acting as a room guard. Please, you must release me from your service. You must let me become squire to Sir Kay before the role has gone to someone else." "Oh," said Merlin, standing and smiling. Is it important for you that you become a squire to Sir Kay? Yes, said Arthur. Yes, it's important for me that I become squire to Sir Kay. How else would I become a knight? A knight? Said Merlin. Come, walk with me. Arthur didn't move at first, but Merlin stopped on the threshold of the door and turned back and said, I was under the impression that you had no desire to spend any longer guarding a room. Please, come with me. And Merlin left, and Arthur followed, and they began to walk down through the castle's keep, and out along the road that led towards the city walls. Tell me, said Merlin, why is it that you wish to become a knight? Why else, said Arthur, for the adventures, for the glory, for protecting people and stopping wrong. There's a difference, said Merlin, between glory and protecting others. As a knight, to protect others is the most important tenement, and though glory might be something that comes from the tales, it is certainly no part of being a knight. I know that, said Arthur, but still it's better than sitting in a kitchen. Yes, said Merlin, it is. And they climbed up the steps that led to the wall and the great gatehouse that stood over the bridge that spanned the River Tyne. Unfortunately, said Merlin, the role of squire to Sir Kay has been taken. What? Said Arthur, but that was mine, but... Merlin raised a hand to stop him. But there is another role, one which is greater than the role of being my escort, certainly, and one which will require you, Arthur, to protect and to serve the needs of people. What is it? Said Arthur. Merlin smiled at him. Arthur, your parents are known to us. You are not an orphan in the kitchens, or should I say, should not be an orphan any longer. Arthur, your father was Uther Pendragon, High King of England, your mother the Lady Igraine of Cornwall. She sent you here long ago, in secrecy, to keep you from your father's enemies at a time when they were about to go and take the realm. He lied. Now, Arthur, the Low Kings of England have come out to support you. You are High King. We are here to go and come to your banner so that you may retake this realm from us. And lo, yonder over that hill, he said, pointing to a great dark mass that was moving over it, yonder is your army. Merlin knelt down. King Arthur, we pledge ourselves to your service. Arthur stared at Merlin, stared at the army, turned and threw up over the wall. Days later, the Low Kings rode south with their armies, and King Arthur at their head. King Ector, Bagdamus, Ban, Uriens, Melodius, Everlake, and Leodegrace, all of them bringing their armies to bear as they headed down towards the south and Britain's capital of Westminster. They were not the entirety of the Low Kings of England, but they were enough, they believed, to bring stability to the realm, and they claimed that as they passed through lands and low kingdoms on their travels, more Low Kings would pledge themselves to Arthur's banner. Arthur doesn't know what to make of all of this. Indeed, he hadn't been asked what he made of all of this. Since Merlin's announcement to him, he had not slept in his own chambers anymore. The greatest rooms of the castle, those that were normally kept by King Ector, were given up to him. People had thrown parties in the streets, celebrated, cheered that the High King had been found, that the High King would bring back prosperity to Britain once more, and even better, that the High King had been masquerading as a kitchen boy for so long. He was a king who understood the needs of the common people. He would be a great king. And the people had gone and filled up the sides of the roads for miles after they'd left Novum Castrum. Arthur had wanted to talk to Alice, to try and explain to her what was going on, but Merlin had forbidden him to speak to Alice. Merlin had been quite clear. Kings cannot be seen to be consorting with kitchen girls, even though they may once have been friends, Arthur. It's a difficult time for you and for her. You must understand that your responsibilities now are very different to what you once were. There is a hierarchy that must be maintained. And so Merlin had forbidden Arthur to see Alice. At least, see her in private. He had seen her as they left the city of Novum Castrum. She had been there, standing in the crowd, looking straight at him. Arthur had tried to stop his horse to go and talk to her, but Merlin had kept it going, put one hand upon the rein and pulled him right out. "Come, sir, we must continue on our journey. We have a long way to go." And Arthur, who'd been able to pull free of Merlin's grasp, had turned back to Alice and called after her that he would keep his oath. His oath still stood. He would return for her. And the people cheered, though Alice had just looked sad. That sad look haunted Arthur now as they approached the old Viking city of Camelot, south of Northgally. This was one of those cities that had been given to one of the Low Kings of Scotland in payment of debts held by Uther Pendragon during the war against Galoin. King Knighthood, who held it now and all the lands surrounding it, originally held lands in Scotland but had since come down into England, and Knighthood had so far refused to meet with Merlin or Ector or any of the other Low Kings to discuss the return of the High King of England. Now, as they rode within distance of the walls, a delegation came out of the city, led by Knighthood and surrounded by his closest knights. Merlin raised his hand to stop the army. The army stopped, and Merlin rode forward just in front of Arthur. "King Knighthood," he called out, "we are graced with your presence. Have you come to offer your loyalty to the new High King?" Knighthood looked at Merlin and sneered, and then looked at Arthur. "So, boy," he said, "you think you're the High King?" Arthur opened his mouth to speak, but Merlin stopped him, came in first. "This is the High King. We have seen enough proofs to satisfy us of that fact, Knighthood, as have the Low Kings present. Will you show loyalty to him?" "Tell me, boy," said Knighthood, turning back to Arthur, "what do you think it means that you are the bastard of Uther and Igraine? You are not High King. The High King's role would pass down to Uther's heir. You are not his heir. You are just some spoil of tomfoolery in the court. You are not High King, boy. Come, tell me, why should I bend the knee?" Arthur tried to speak again, but Merlin put one hand upon his arm to stop him and said, "Knighthood, this is..." "No!" said Arthur. I will speak. I do not know of what the situation was between Uther and my mother, but I am High King, and so, as High King, I demand that you should bend the knee. Nenses laughed and turned at Merlin, cocked his head, smiled, and then back to Arthur again. "Oh boy," he said, "you have a tongue after all." "Let me tell you, boy," he said, "there was no love between your father or your mother, let me assure you. After all, your father led a campaign of war against your mother's countrymen, slew most of them, and took the castle of Tintagel. Why, the man who stands next to you right now was the right hand of Uther Pendragon in bringing about the destruction of Tintagel and slaying your mother. Trust me, I can fill you in on all the details of what went on between them, and it's not a pretty sight, boy, and I would worry very, very much about spending time with this creature from Avalon or any of these low kings, none of whom came to your mother's aid. You're a puppet, boy, a puppet for the counsels of these low kings. Either they'll turn on you, or you'll be slain. I suggest you go back to hiding in your kitchens, boy." Merlin straightened up in his seat. "Nenters, I swear, if you do not show respect towards the High King, then I will—" "Enough," said Nenters. "I have shown respect to the High King, if this even is a High King, by telling him the truth, something that I doubt if you really did, Merlin. You slew the boy's mother, no doubt." "Come," he said to his men, "let's return. We will not bend the knee, Merlin, and Scotland will hear of this." And Nenters turned and rode back towards the castle. Arthur turned towards Merlin. You were—" "Enough," said Merlin. "It's a complicated story, and one that we do not have time to explain." Westminster was not the impressive sight that Arthur had expected. Since the fall of Uther, the capital of England had been held by the people who had risen up in revolt against the man. There had been no need to take it back. There had been no High King to want to reclaim its palace, and the low kings had been caught up in dealing with their own struggles. Now, as Arthur looked down upon it, he did not see any strong walls, the likes he had seen at Camelot, or like he had seen in his own city of Novum Castrum. There were just weak, flimsy things, walls of wood and spikes that had been erected by the peasants. And beyond those walls and spikes, a ramshackle line of houses and dwellings that led to the tall spires of the palace. The palace was no castle, no keep, nothing designed to defend against attack or to keep a king safe. It was a thing of beauty, of opulence, of majesty, and it was no surprise that it had fallen. Stood upon the crest of a hill opposite, Arthur was at the head of his army, and the low kings lined up alongside him to look upon the realm. "There," said Merlin, "there lies the city of Westminster, the capital of your realm, my lord. We will retake it for you and install you as king. When you take it, We must show mercy on any who want to lay down their arms. This must be about showing the people that a true and just king has returned. And he said this as much to the other low kings as he did to Arthur. We must show them that we are here for them, to serve them and to protect them, not to spite them. They rose up against my father, said Arthur. They rose up against an institution that had failed them, Merlin replied. But they did rise up against him. Merlin nodded his head. These people, they what? Tore him out of his palace? Aye, said Hector. They tore him out of his palace, brought him out into the street, and slew him by his own sword, if that's to be believed. And we would show them compassion, said Arthur. We must show them compassion, said Merlin. They are your subjects. They need to love you, to be loyal to you. They've already killed one high king, and that place is no place to defend against an angry mob. They must be slain, said Arthur. They must be slain, every single one of them. No, said Merlin, that's not. You need to protect them. He's right, said Hector. A mob like that, they've already gone and ripped one high king out into the street and slain him. You need to send a message that it can't happen again, and that their palace is no place to protect a king. No, said Merlin, it isn't how it's going to be done. With all due respect, said Hector, this here is a council around table, and you are just an emissary from Avalon. Who stands with me, said Hector, for the retaking of this city and the deaths of any who stand against us? The other kings all drew their swords in agreement. My lord, said Hector to Arthur, I suggest you and the emissary shall wait at the back. We'll put a line of guards to stand with you. We'll let you know when the battle is done. Merlin tried to protest, but Hector looked at him, sword ready in his hand, and a group of knights came to surround Arthur and Merlin and bring them to the back. From his position there, Arthur watched as the knights raised up their swords and ran down the hill, charging towards the walls of Westminster. And though they were walls, true enough, they weren't any real walls, not built by true castle designers. These were walls that were there to show that no king was welcome in Westminster, to show independence. They were not walls to show the sign of strength against an onslaught of an army. And the walls fell quickly, and the screams soon rang out. The fighting had died down, confined to the Palace of Westminster by the time Arthur and Merlin entered the city. They walked past corpses and the dying and the blood and fallen weapons as they made their way to the palace. The weapons that the people had were no real weapons at all, makeshift things for the most part, clubs or axes that were being used for cutting wood. They'd fallen quickly. Merlin did not speak to Arthur as they made their way through this. He just wanted Arthur to see what had happened as a result of his instruction, wanted Arthur to see firsthand the death that had taken place because of his anger. Arthur looked at the bodies and he felt afraid. Afraid at their deaths, afraid at the blood, but also afraid that he might as easily have become one of those bloody bodies in the street if the mob had had their way. They approached the palace, and opposite it, the great Abbey of Westminster. And there, upon a rock, between those two great buildings, a sword was struck. "There," said Merlin, "that sword there is the sword of your father Uther Pendragon. The men who rose up against it stuck it there when Uther fell, as a symbol of an end to the line of kings. It had but one man's blood upon it that day, Arthur, and on this day I fear that is the blood of many men, women, and children to stain it further. But it is your sword, bloody and dark. You are king now, Arthur. You must take that sword back, and you must spend your reign cleaning that blood from it until it is as pure as you are." Arthur looked at the sword and came down from his horse and approached it. The old blood had stained the blade a bloody, rusty red. He turned back to Merlin. "There's only all the blood on it." "Not all blood can be seen," said Merlin, as he came and approached the sword. Then he turned and pointed back at the streets. "Look at the blood there, Arthur. You must spend your time as king protecting the people, not driving them to this." "But they're dangerous," said Arthur. "If they dragged my father out of that palace and slew him in the street, it was because he was a bad man," said Merlin. "Your father was a bad king. You served him," said Arthur. "You served him. You're the one who helped him go and slay my mother." "Your mother was not slain by me," said Merlin. "She took her own life in fear rather than to spend any longer with the monster that your father had become. Yes, I served him, but I served him only to rescue you, Arthur. My mission was to bring you from Tintagel and to Avalon, where we could raise you in order so that you could be good and pure and true. I served your father as a means to an end, so that this wouldn't happen." Arthur looked at Merlin, shaking under the force of the man's accusations. "You cannot become your father, Arthur. You must be a king that will bring peace to the realm, not blood." And in that moment, as Merlin railed against Arthur, a man burst out of the doors of Westminster Abbey, a club raised high above his head, screaming in defiant fury as he came towards Merlin. Club raised up high, he cracked it down upon Merlin's head. Merlin fell to the ground, and the man turned around again, raising his club, ready to strike Arthur. And in that moment, Arthur instinctively seized hold of the sword from the stone, ripped it from the stone, brought it into the air, and threw the chest of the man who'd raised the club against him. More blood fell upon that sword, and the club-wielding man fell to the earth. And a great cry went up from all the soldiers and knights who had seen Arthur strike this man. "Hail, Arthur! Hail, Arthur! The High King has returned." And as they chanted, "Hail! Hail! Hail!" Merlin got to his feet and looked at Arthur and the blood that had sprayed from the fallen man. After the fall of Westminster, London quickly surrendered. The leaders of the rebels that had rose up to take those two cities were executed. Arthur was crowned High King of Britain. But the Low Kings would not let Arthur return to the Palace of Westminster. No, it was a palace, not a castle, not a place to keep a High King safe. in a realm that was so tumultuous to begin with. Instead, they decided to keep Arthur in an encampment surrounded by soldiers and knights upon one of the hills that faced the city, where all the armies could protect him and the Low Kings could advise him until a new solution of where the king's permanent residence should be found. They spent a week there debating where on the map should the king go, which castles were available, who would be willing to lend a castle to the king. They were all eager that the king should come and be close to them, so that they might have influence over him, and all eager that not too much influence should be exerted over the king by their neighbours. And as they sat there debating and bickering, Arthur was kept silent. It was not Arthur's place to speak during these debates, Merlin said. After all, Arthur was not aware of all the different opportunities that the kingdom had to offer, was not aware of the castles or the geography or the land, and so it would be best in Arthur's interest to stay silent during this, to let the kings decide what would be best and to abide by their decision. Arthur did keep silent. In truth, he had been silent since he'd first slain that man. He'd thought about what it would be like to kill someone in battle before, but not really appreciated what it would have involved. And the cheering as well, that had been the worst part, to have slain a man in instinct like that. To the sound of so many people rejoicing. It confused him. He wasn't sure how to deal with it. He asked Merlin if perhaps Alice could be sent for. No, Merlin said. No, I have told you, my lord. It is not right for a high king to be spending time with a kitchen girl. Well, we need kitchen girls here, said Arthur. Surely send for her, bring her down. Merlin smiled softly and not without sympathy. Perhaps in time, my king, it might be possible to arrange a meeting between the two of you, but not while your position is so new, not while there are still so many areas that we must be careful in treading through. Politics is a dense marshland, my lord. Please trust me to navigate it on your behalf, he said. And so Arthur sat in silence, and Merlin spoke with the Low Kings, and as they spoke and as they bickered, a great horn rang out over the hilltops. And they raised their eyes to look as a vast army approached, holding the banners of the Low Kings of Scotland. Hello ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed tonight's tale. The best is yet to come though. So make sure that you've hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. If you could tell someone else about the show, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks.